So what's it like to grow up in a business family like the Godrejes? Do they get taught some sort of business secrets when they're kids, or do they grow up like the rest of us? Nyrika Holkar is the executive director of Godrej Enterprises Group. It's a group that manages everything from the locks to the almirahs to aerospace and real estate. And she was sitting at the table at the helm of the negotiation when the group split into two, or what they call an amicable restructuring of their shareholding. She talks to me today about success and failure and what it's like to head businesses that are so different and going into a new world of AI and innovation. Can you tell us a story about the locks?
My uh, great grand uncle, Adishar, was an inventor, and he started out by taking a loan from a relative to start the business and got the patent for the world's first springless lock.
The name Godrej, while it's your family name, for the rest of India, it means a standalone steel almirah, right? Because people would say, "Ye kahan rakha hai? Maine Godrej mein rakha hai." Where is the steel almirah, and what is it doing now?
In the first campaign that we did to launch the cupboard was the whole idea of within a joint family, how do you create your own private space? Now we've kind of reinvented it in the sense of we do it in wood. We also offer a large variety of configurations. We have had a long partnership with ISRO since the 80s. At that point of time, President Kalam had approached my grandfather to say, would you be interested in partnering?
And now you have what everyone's calling the split, but you are calling it a restructuring of shareholding. Would you tell us? And I think that this is really interesting because you helmed a lot of the negotiation of how this really complex structure gets divided into two halves. But what brought it about?
It was definitely a team effort, and I think it took many years of discussions and trying to find a solution that optimized.
Thank you so much for making the trip all the way to Andheri East.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. There's a lot going on, but I'm so excited to have this conversation with you because um, there are so many aspects to the things that we can talk about. There's management, there's design, there's a woman running a company that largely does engineering and things like that. But I want to start off with the fact that you chose to be a lawyer. And you're a member of the Godrej family, but this is perhaps the first time that you're actually doing any media, speaking to the media, coming out in public. You've had a fairly quiet-ish, private-ish profile up till now, and you studied to be a lawyer instead of an engineer, and you chose, you were at AZB for a while, so you chose the corporate lawyer life, which is a very hard, demanding sort of life to live. I know that because I have a lot of friends who did that. Why? Why didn't you just join the family business? Was that always the plan? How did we get to here?
No, I was always interested to study law, and my parents put it down to the fact that I like to argue a lot. But I was always interested in the methodology thinking. So they felt that I should be more broad-based for undergrad. So I did philosophy and economics. Also, the idea of philosophy was that generally it's done as a precursor to law in terms of logic and structuring. So I finished my BA, and then my parents said, if you still feel like doing law, do it afterwards. So then I said, no, I'm ready. So I'd really like to do law. So I went on and I did my law degrees and worked in the UK, and then I moved back to India. And although I've wanted to join the family business at one point, I felt that it would be good to be able to bring a skill set and a perspective that could help the business.
So, okay, so I've always wanted to ask this question. So, what is it like growing up in a business family like the Godrejes? In the sense that Are you, from the time you're very young, aware of the fact that I'm a Godrej? You know, we're the Almirah and the lock people. You know, we're a family, a household name. The gifts of everyone have to go towards the family business. What is that like?
No, we grew up with my grandparents who were both very hands-on.
Hmm.
So my grandfather never took a holiday. So he had kind of built and executed the whole vision of his father of building the township in Vikhroli. My grandmother had started building the school and, creating a whole ecosystem for people to thrive, because Vikhroli at that point of time was not a suburb, it was a jungle.
Yes.
And people thought that, my great grandfather and granduncle were out of their minds to kind of choose this location to start a factory. And so it took a lot of effort to actually bring people in, because, my grandmother had to go door to door to people's homes to encourage them to send their children to the school. They built a whole township, housing, hospital. So I think all of those elements, my grandfather believed that everything should be comfortable so that people can give their best to their work. And because both of them sort of lived and breathed this whole, experience, it was very powerful for us, because it became very much a part of the DNA in terms of what they were trying to build. And so we always grew up with that ethos.
And now you have what everyone's calling the split, but you are calling it a restructuring of shareholding. Would you tell us? And I think that this is really interesting because you helmed a lot of the negotiation of how this really complex structure gets divided into two halves. But what brought it about?
Yeah, I think it was, I mean, it was definitely a team effort. And I think it took many years of discussions and I think understanding each other's perspectives and trying to find a solution that optimized. And I think that we wouldn't call it a split so much, because I know split is a word that's used very frequently, but I think there's a lot of work which remains shared, whether it's towards the brand, whether it's towards real estate development in Vikhroli. And also, I think as fourth generation, being able to also work together on many aspects. So I think it was just a simplification and realignment of personal shareholding, because the companies were always run very independently. So there was no kind of split of companies or, change of, teams, etc. So in that sense, it didn't really, or it hasn't really affected the organization as such.
So your half, if I may call it that, which is Godrej Enterprises, has the locks and the keys and the cupboards, and we're going to get to that. But also a lot of manufacturing, a lot of aerospace, a lot of tech. Could you take us to what are the businesses that you're looking after right now?
We like to think of it in maybe three different clusters. So our consumer facing cluster has always been sort of our sort of core businesses, if one has to look at it that way, in terms of a number of years that we've been in the business, also in terms of market leadership in the category. That would be appliances, furniture, locks and security. And on the nation first clusters that we call, or all our nation building businesses, would be aerospace and precision engineering, process equipment for basically heavy engineering for process industries, and tooling. And then we also do warehouse automation, and we do static racking and shelving for warehouses, and material handling. And and of course, real estate.
Right. So that's interesting because now, again, both sides have the Godrej name, but there is a distinction. And this is, again, something that you've worked very hard on is to create the distinction while holding on to the name. And you just released that design. Tell us how you got there and what's different, what stays the same.
So the cursive logo
Yes.
stays the same. It was the signature of my great grandfather, Pirosha Godrej.
Okay.
And so that remains the same. What we did change was the color. So we went from 3 colors to 1 color, to purple. We chose purple because it reflects a dynamism. It reflects creativity. It also reflects a premiumization, which we are bringing about in our portfolio of products for our consumer-facing businesses and doing more design-led work for our engineering nation first cluster. So the idea of the repositioning actually was precipitated earlier before the realignment because we did research where we went out to our consumers, to people who don't consume our products, our stakeholders, to really understand their perception towards the brand. And what came out very strongly was that the trust and quality remain very strong earmarks of the brand. But on the edge factors, if one has to call it, of design or
Yes.
tech integration, we're not as closely associated. And so the idea of this repositioning was really to also look at our business strategy in terms of, how do we really relook at consumer experience, because experience is so important now. People have moved beyond products to really looking at the whole ecosystem. So that is, a central part of the repositioning. How do we deliver a better and more holistic experience to our consumers? The second one is on, the whole R&D as well as design, fit, feel, finish. Because today, people, because of smartphones, because of access, consumers are much more informed than they were in the past. They know all of the features, they know, all of the price points. So how do we really provide a strong value proposition that and aesthetics is very important. So how do we really deliver products that look good in addition to having...
So I was going to ask you that because, and I was thinking about this while preparing for this conversation, which was the name Godrej. While it's your family name, for the rest of India, it means a standalone steel almirah, right? Because people would say, "Ye kaha rakha hai? Maine Godrej mein rakha hai," because that became then the effective sort of name for a steel cupboard that you could lock up and store all of your valuables and your memories in. And now we have all of these other brands that have come in and they're doing cool things and they can like modularly set up an entire room for you if you want. A lot of people are now designing their furniture into the homes that they buy. Where is the steel almirah and what is it doing now to fit into the new world? Which is, I think, what you're talking about when you say, sort of being at the edge of product and design and customer service. How has the Godrej sort of moved into today?
Yeah. No, I think the story of the almirah is a very interesting story. And when the product was first being made, it was difficult because there was unavailability of steel. There were challenges in technology. And my grandfather at the time, was doing the last set of inspections before the first cupboards were released. And he saw that the steel was a bit undulated. And because of the quality of the steel, there was very little that could be done. And they were also working against a deadline. And so one of the team members said, why don't we just go ahead and, really put this out. And so he he put his foot down and he said, absolutely not. We're not making a product for today. We are making a product for generations, and it needs to be the best. So they, sat day and night, figured out, and were able to do a design detail that helped make it flatter. And finally, the product was released and became a huge success. But I think the insight behind the product was actually, what was so powerful, because it was really, and it was in the first campaign that we did to launch the cupboard, was the whole idea of within a joint family, how do you create your own private space? And I think over time, it's still one of our largest selling categories. But now we've kind of reinvented it in the sense of we do it in wood now. We also offer a large variety of configurations. So there's a lot of configurability because people want personalization. Indians are very creative and, like to have that kind of stamp of their own creativity in their homes. And I think post-COVID, maybe earlier people didn't spend so much time at home, but post-COVID, people have realized the importance of their own home and are actually putting a lot more emphasis on the little details like door handles and, other things which maybe in the past people didn't give so much attention to.
Locks was the first product
Yes.
that your great-grandfather and his brothers,
My great-granduncle, yes.
they started when they were 20 years old.
Yes.
Can you tell us a story about the locks?
So the locks was a very interesting story because my great-granduncle, Adishar, was an inventor, and he was an entrepreneur, and he thrived on creating things. And so he had a string of businesses, some of which were unsuccessful, before he started the locks business. And he started out by taking a loan from a relative to start the business, and got the patent for the world's first springless lock. It was a lock that didn't have the spring and made it more secure. And it was a global patent. So it was a big achievement at that time. And also, what was interesting was the whole process of benchmarking, because they traveled a lot to, to other countries where technology was more advanced, like Germany and France, and that's how they started the business.
I actually, a couple of years ago, visited the lock factory in Goa.
Okay.
Which I thought was really interesting because I did a walk around and there are a lot of women, which is something that you worked on.
Yes.
A lot of women on the shop floor actually working those factory shifts. And there were some people who'd worked there for 20, 25 years. And they changed the fortunes of their families with this job. Tell us how that came around and, whose idea was that?
So I think the whole evolution of women in engineering has also, been through a shift, because earlier the availability of women who had done engineering or were able to come into a company like ours was restricted. And it was always thought that no, women don't do engineering, and therefore, there would be poorer diversity ratios. But today, as we're seeing, even in our highly precision businesses, it's the women welders and the women who are now also doing some of these very complex jobs. And our locks factory is important because in addition to fabrication, there's also assembly, and assembly of the very small components. That is a very fine work that women do well.
So what's the split on the factory floors for you, across manufacturing or across locks?
So in locks today, it would be 75% women.
Wow.
And we have certain plants where we will have more representation of women, like our appliances in Mohali in the north. Um, Others, maybe the diversity ratios would be different.
Mm.
But what we're seeing is an increased representation of women in other functions which were formerly male dominated. Because earlier it would be maybe HR where we would have the most women, but now it's across, you know, most functions. Is there scope to improve? Of course, there is. But are we moving forward? Yes, we are.
I find it also very interesting that you're in aerospace. What part of aerospace? So, of the rockets that ISRO has sent up, what portion of it was yours?
So we do the engines and thrusters and a lot of the other critical components that go into the rocket. And we have had a long partnership with ISRO since the 80s. And at that point of time, President Kalam had approached my grandfather to say, would you be interested in partnering? And it was a very long gestation period. It lost a lot of money for many years. It was a lot of development work, which takes many years. But I think over the years, the kind of experience that our teams have built and the kind of work that they've been able to do and the partnerships, I think those are, even today when officials come to visit us, they say we feel like we're with family because we've spent so many years together, and that association is very strong. And I think those relationships are so important.
So, right now, you obviously have the contracts that you already have with ISRO where you're making the engines and the thrusters, but you're also partnering with startups on R&D.
So we do.
That's culturally very different, groups of people to work with, right? What is that like?
It is and it isn't because
Engineers are engineers.
and I think the startups in the space are also people that have been. It's not like they've just come into it or they're newbies. They have also been in it for some time. So maybe from a scale perspective, they don't have in that much scale, but they have deep experience in the category, in the industry. So from that perspective, and they bring a lot of value because you don't need to reinvent the wheel and you don't need to do everything. And I think now it's about how well you partner with people and build up the ecosystem, because a lot of India today, even if you're looking at MSME suppliers, we really have to bring that quality up, because finally, whether we are working for a Rolls Royce or a Honeywell, we're as good as the supply chain.
Yeah.
And because these are critical components, because liabilities are significant, it's important to ensure that the entire backbone of the supply chain is strong. And I think now with the whole China +1 and people looking for, supply chain resilience and alternatives, India has become a very interesting location for people to come to. And but we don't have the scale of China, and also in terms of how they build their shop floors, there'll be 6-7 floors because they're building for the future, whereas we build
what capacity we need right now.
Yeah, because it's also very expensive. And so how do we really build that scale, but not build it just to be the lowest cost operator, but to really do quality manufacturing and engineering and give a solution that is...
So what does India need? Is it the trained manpower or the talent that we need? Is it the space? Is it, the 250 permission slips that are required in order to put a facility together? Where does that change need to come from?
I think skilling is a huge is a huge part today where there is a lacuna. I think also with the advent of artificial intelligence, with digitization, it's not that jobs are becoming redundant, but how do we become more effective in our jobs with technology? And I think that's kind of this agility learning mindset that all of us need to have.
You're also talking about data, you're talking about AI, and you did say at one point that you're planning on using data across a lot of your consumer businesses to service your customer across different businesses. So, explain to me what that means. So, if I bought a lock, and I'm now in your database as someone who has bought a lock, what happens next?
So the idea of this project was a really re-looking at service as one of the key aspects of consumer experience. If you have a bad service, you'll always remember it forever.
Yeah.
So the idea of this service transformation was to really empower people on the field with the right tools, because the most irritating thing is if your AC is broken,
Yes.
and I'm supposed to come to fix it and I don't have the right part and you have to wait another 2 weeks for the part to be replaced. So how do we really ensure that we get the service call first time right? So equipping the field with the right tools to be able to respond to and also preempt issues. And I think the other idea is, how do we create a single customer record? Because earlier, each of the business had their customer data, which was siloed. But oftentimes we service the same customer, maybe different parts of the customer, but we don't have a single view of the customer. And so this service transformation was really to how do we look at our customer to understand them in a better way so that we can service their needs in a better way.
Tell me about the sustainability aspect as well, because you're a company that's making, from locks to furniture to, aerospace components. How are you keeping climate change? And I know that this is something that you feel very strongly about. How is climate change an active part of all of those decisions? And how are you able to draw that balance?
I think the whole idea of sustainability, though it has taken prominence more recently,
Now, yeah.
has always been very much a part of our DNA. In fact, one of our values is environmental stewardship. Even in terms of targets for 2032, our target is to increase revenue coming from what we term as green products
Okay.
to 50%.
And what are green products?
So green products will be either, say, for instance, our furniture, which is Green Pro certified. The wood is ethically sourced. It comes from a sustainable supply chain. Or in terms of our appliances, looking at creating more energy efficient appliances. For instance, even in terms of AC penetration, if you have to look at, the world heating up faster.
Yes.
India's penetration today is in single digits, and
And that will change very drastically.
because ACs were considered a discretionary product in a manner of speaking, but as temperatures rise, it will become more of a necessity because it will become a productivity tool.
Survival. Yeah.
And with that increased penetration will also come a big price on the climate. So how do we really create newer technologies that are more energy efficient, that also reduce the lifetime value of the product? Because people often look at the upfront cost,
Yes.
but don't always measure the lifetime cost. And with 5-star rated ACs, for instance, you can reduce your utility bill over the lifetime of the product, but it becomes prohibitively expensive. So how do we really bring the cost down? And as a private player, we can't do it alone. So we do need the government, in the same way as the government intervened on LED lights and have made it ubiquitous. we need to be able to do work with the government to make
So you're saying
more affordable.
you have technology that makes ACs sustainable over their lifetimes, but there needs to be a sort of policy intervention from government to make this commonplace. Everybody needs to use this sort of
And
technology
affordable.
and make
So
it more
maybe give,
affordable.
incentives or not tax it as high. Because at the end of the day,
Because it's falling into that discretionary category for GST right now,
Correct.
and it's being treated like a luxury for tax. You're saying
correct.
so. The appeal now is that, hey, we have an AC that's more sustainable, better for the planet, better utilization of electricity. Bring us into a different category.
Yeah. And it's across the board. It's not that only we are doing.
Anyone who's using this technology.
Yeah, and I think that how we are encouraging people to change is important, because I mean the brand can just do that much.
I do want to ask you this though, and I ask this of all of my guests on my podcast, because we fundamentally run a podcast on failure. The idea is to bring in really successful people and have them tell us stories about failure. Have you ever failed? Have you ever experienced failure? What was that like? What happened?
Yeah, I think multiple times. I think that it's important. Of course, we want to be successful, but I think the idea of allowing for failure in a, how do you say, in a disciplined way. Experimentation, but not wild experimentation. How do you do experimentation in a contained way, and how do you really how do you applaud and celebrate failure? So I think there's in a lot of our approaches, we were trying to build a data lake for the company, and it was very complex given the different businesses, and also a lot of technology has evolved over many years. So it's kind of been, some of it has been homegrown, some of it has evolved over time. So the architecture is quite complex, and we tried to build it in many different ways and failed. And then finally, our chief digital officer came in, and he had this wonderful solution, and he was able to make it work. But I think in that time of a year and a half, where we just tried every avenue and couldn't find a solution, yes, it was demotivating. People felt frustrated. But at the same time, I think all of the creativity tools were put on the table to make it work. And I think finally it did work, and it was, it's been a huge.
No, but personally for you, and that's a team working together. But personally for you, has there ever been a moment where you're like, how am I going to get up tomorrow and go back in? Have you ever felt that there was something there was a failure there that was bigger than you were?
All the time. I think even with parenting, I think there's I think each parent comes into this environment with, of course, your own baggage, your own thoughts about how your children should be, and oftentimes it's you have to speak with your partner, try to understand their perspective. But at the same time, sometimes if you feel strongly about something, because it's your child, you feel like you need to do it, and many times it's backfired on me personally. But I think that it's also important, and I always have this discussion with my mom. She's like, why do you treat your children like your friends? They're not your friend. I said, yeah, because I talk about, I'm struggling with this. And she said, you shouldn't be doing that. But I think it's important to have that transparency, and also to show your own children that you're vulnerable, and that it's okay to do that. But who knows if it's right or wrong.
We figured out at some point. I had a friend who recently told me that I've set aside money for my children to use at therapy because I know I'm going to screw them up. So here's the therapy money for what I'm sure I have done. I don't know what I've done, but whatever. After a point, you just have to give in and say, okay, I'm not going to get it right. There's a tendency also to do the opposite of what our parents did, which might not be the best thing, I guess. But working mom, 2 children, under 7. And I was reading you this thing and you said, I do this, and then I get home at 10, and then I like to read these 4 things. And I thought, when are you reading? How is it possible to be working the job you're working and have 2 kids and still read?
I wish I had more time to read, but it's night on the way back at night and weekends. But I think it's always a balance of priorities, and more often than not, I feel like a failure at everything.
I find it really interesting when people use the word balance for what working mothers do. Because it feels more like juggling on a unicycle and balance is just like, I'm not going to fall today. That's not balance. That's sheer luck on some days, right? And is there have you had a moment of chaos where there's a board meeting and a PTA meeting and like snacks that have to be made at the same time, and somehow you're like, which of these things is more important?
It happens very often, and I think I think women just have to be very organized, and we have to ensure that we have a good team behind us to help us function, because I think it's not easy, and children, my children, I know they always say that you're too busy for us, you don't have time. And so I think it's also not so much the time you spend, with the quality of time that you have with them when you do, which is important.
What is your advice for young people who are trying to decide right now routes to take? Because I feel that we're always at that, okay, should I study this or that? Should I marry and have children, or should I continue to sort of, seek my own path? And it all seems really final. It all seems like there's a clock ticking on every decision. If you were to look back now, what was the route you used to make decisions that worked out most for you?
I think following your gut. I think, at least for me, I've always had a very strong feeling for something, and if I've followed that, it's always helped me. And at times when I haven't listened to it, or I've done something different and felt that internally it didn't feel right, oftentimes it wasn't right. So I think that intuition and following your gut, which oftentimes we don't give as much credence to with all the voices in our head, I think that's very important. And I think also being passionate about what you do, because I think that is something which you need to be motivated in the morning to wake up and to do something. So I think that passion is very important.
Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you for having me.